What happens when a single fossilized bone convinces an entire generation of alien children that humanity's greatest treasure isn't technology, isn't art, but the stories sleeping beneath the soil? Kira had asked herself this question 1,000 times since the incident began, and still, she had no satisfactory answer. The morning had started like any other fieldwork rotation at the Terran Cultural Exchange Academy. 12 energetic Velari cubs tumbling out of the transport shuttle, their pointed ears twitching with excitement, their small hands already reaching for everything in sight. Kira pressed her palm to her forehead, counting heads automatically as they scattered across the meadow like seeds caught in a wind. 12, she whispered to herself, silver hair catching the golden light of Earth's sun. Still 12. Good. She had been a cultural educator for 6 cycles now, ever since the Velari Consortium had established the first exchange program with humanity. Her job was simple enough on paper: introduce young Velari to the wonders of human civilization, foster understanding between species, build bridges that would outlast them all. In practice, it meant chasing cubs through museums, explaining why they absolutely could not eat the decorative plants in restaurants, and fielding approximately 400 questions per hour about why humans had such small, rounded ears. Miss Kira, Miss Kira. The voice belonged to Tessi, the smallest of the group, her pastel blue skin practically vibrating with excitement. I found something. Kira turned, adjusting the collar of her fitted tactical jacket. The valley stretched before them in rolling waves of green and gold, dotted with wildflowers that humans apparently called daisies. It was meant to be a simple nature appreciation exercise. Observe the ecosystem, collect samples of non-living materials, learn about Earth's seasons. Nothing complicated, nothing that could possibly go wrong. She should have known better. Tessi was crouched at the edge of a small creek bed, her tiny fingers wrapped around something pale and curved. The other cubs had already begun gravitating toward her, drawn by the universal pull of potential discovery. Kira's heart dropped into her stomach. Please be a rock, she thought desperately. Please just be an oddly shaped rock. What do you have there, little one? She asked, keeping her voice carefully calm. Tessi held up her prize, and Kira felt the universe shift beneath her feet. It was a bone. Not just any bone, a fossil, ancient and weathered, clearly belonging to something that had died millions of years before humanity ever walked this planet. The shape was unmistakable, even to her non-expert eyes, a fragment of what humans would call a dinosaur. It's an earth bone, Tessi shrieked, and the sound seemed to ripple outward through time itself. The other cubs crowded closer, their luminescent skin pulsing with the soft blue glow that indicated intense emotional states. Little hands reached, small voices rose in a cacophony of wonder, and Kira, standing at the center of this storm, realized she had absolutely no idea what to do. Everyone please, she called out, raising her hands. Let's not. Are there more? That was Fen, the oldest of the group at nearly 8 cycles, his silver-white hair already pulled back in the style of the cultural scholars. If one is here, there must be more. That's how fossils work. I read about it in the human database. I want to find one. Me too. Can we dig? Please, Miss Kira, please? The word dig seemed to echo with ominous weight. Kira opened her mouth to explain all the reasons why they absolutely could not just start excavating random sections of a protected nature preserve. But before she could speak, another voice cut through the chaos, warm, human, and tinged with unmistakable amusement. Well, looks like someone made a discovery. Marcus Chen stood at the crest of the small hill, his weathered field jacket covered in the dust of 100 excavation sites. He was the Academy's human liaison, an archaeologist by training and a storyteller by nature. And in the 3 months since Kira had met him, she had never once seen him without dirt under his fingernails or wonder in his dark eyes. The cubs immediately swarmed toward him, Tessi leading the charge with her fossil held aloft like a trophy. Dr. Marcus, look what I found. An earth bone. A real one. Is it a dinosaur? I bet it's a dinosaur. Marcus crouched down to their level, examining the fossil with genuine respect. His fingers traced the curve of the bone with the gentleness of someone who understood that everything, even stone, had a story to tell. This, he said slowly, appears to be a fragment of a hadrosaur femur. They went extinct about 66 million years ago. The cubs fell silent. Kira could see their minds working, trying to process a number so vast it might as well have been infinity. That's older than our whole civilization, Fen whispered. That's older than almost everything, Marcus agreed. And you know what's amazing? This bone right here, in little Tessie's hands, it's been waiting in this ground for millions of years, waiting for someone to find it, waiting to have its story told. Kira watched the transformation happen in real time. One moment, she had a group of energetic but manageable cubs on a simple field trip. The next, she had 12 newly minted paleontologists with stars in their eyes and dirt in their hearts. Oh no, she thought. Can we find more? Tessi asked, her voice trembling with hope. Marcus looked up at Kira, and she saw the question in his expression. She should say no. Protocol demanded it. This was a protected area. They needed permits, the cubs had no training, and she was already behind on her quarterly educational assessments. But looking at those small, hopeful faces, seeing the way Tessi clutched her fossil like it was the most precious thing in the universe, she felt something shift inside her chest. When was the last time she had seen anyone this excited about learning? I'll need to make some calls, she heard herself say. The cubs erupted in cheers so loud that a flock of birds took flight from a nearby tree. And that was how it began. 3 days later, the valley had transformed. What had been a peaceful stretch of wilderness was now a carefully organized excavation site, complete with gridded dig squares, proper tools, and 12 Velari cubs, who had collectively decided that sleep was an unnecessary biological function that only got in the way of discovering more earth bones. Kira stood at the edge of the main dig site, watching the chaos with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. Her silver hair was pulled back in a functional braid now, and there was dirt on her fitted tactical pants that she suspected would never fully wash out. She had been a cultural educator for 6 cycles, but she had never not once seen her students this engaged. You look worried. Marcus appeared beside her, offering a canteen of water. She took it gratefully, drinking deep. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to explain this to the consortium review board, she admitted. Pretty sure the cubs started a full valley excavation because they got excited about dinosaurs isn't in any approved curriculum. Learning doesn't always follow a curriculum, Marcus said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Sometimes it follows a bone. She snorted an undignified sound that would have mortified her mother, but that felt entirely appropriate in the moment. Is that what passes for wisdom on Earth? Following bones? Hey, following bones built my entire career. He gestured toward the dig site, where Fen was carefully brushing soil away from what appeared to be another fossil fragment. Look at them, Kira. They're not just playing. They're learning patience, precision, collaboration. They're connecting with a world that existed millions of years before either of our species. That's not chaos, that's education at its purest. Kira watched Tessi helping a smaller cub named Lyra handle a brush with the gentle patience of a seasoned mentor. 3 days ago, Tessi had been the most impulsive child in the group, incapable of focusing on anything for more than 5 minutes. Now she moved with the careful deliberation of someone who understood that some treasures required time to uncover. They've changed, Kira murmured. They're learning that the past matters, Marcus said. That the things that came before them, even things as strange and distant as dinosaurs, shape the world they're standing on. That's not just paleontology. That's respect for history. Something in his voice made her turn to look at him more closely. There was a weight there, a depth that went beyond simple academic interest. This matters to you, she said. Personally, Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching the cubs work. When I was a kid, he finally said, I found a fossil in my grandfather's backyard. Just a little trilobite, nothing special. But my grandfather sat down with me, and he told me that fossil had been in the ground longer than humans had existed, longer than mammals. He said the earth was always whispering stories, and fossils were just its way of making sure someone heard. He smiled, but there was something bittersweet in it. He died a few years later, but every time I dig up something ancient, I think about him. I think about all the people who came before me, and all the people who'll come after. We're just one small part of an enormous story. Kira felt her throat tighten. The Velari didn't think about time the same way humans did. Their history was measured in cycles and generations, neat and orderly. But humans understood something that her people were only beginning to grasp. They understood that they were temporary. And rather than despair, they had turned that knowledge into a gift. They preserved. They remembered. They dug up bones and told stories about creatures that had been dead for eons, not because it served any practical purpose, but because forgetting felt like a kind of death in itself. "That's beautiful," she said softly. Marcus glanced at her, and for a moment, something passed between them, a recognition, a connection that transcended species and culture. Then Tessie's voice shattered the moment. "Miss Kira, Dr. Marcus, we found something big." They ran. The cubs had gathered around a section of the dig near the old creek bed, their small bodies forming a tight circle around whatever they had uncovered. Kira's heart was pounding as she pushed through, Marcus close behind. And then she saw it, and she forgot how to breathe. It wasn't a dinosaur. There, carefully exposed in the dark earth, was a complete skeleton, but not of any prehistoric creature. It was human, ancient, fossilized, but unmistakably human. And clutched in its bone-white fingers was a small figure carved from stone, a crude representation of what looked like a child, held close to the chest of whoever had died here countless millennia ago. The cubs had fallen silent. Even Tessi, usually unable to stay quiet for more than 30 seconds, stood frozen in place. Kira looked at Marcus, and she saw tears sliding silently down his face. "It's a mother," he whispered. She was holding her child. Even in death, she was holding on. Kira's vision blurred. She thought about all the reports she had read about humanity, their wars, their conflicts, their complicated history. But none of those documents had captured this, the profound tenderness of a species that loved so deeply. They carried that love into eternity. "How old?" Fen asked, his young voice trembling. Marcus knelt beside the skeleton, his movements reverent. "Based on the geological layer, tens of thousands of years. This woman lived and died before writing, before cities, before almost everything you'd recognize as human civilization. But she made something for her baby," Lyra said. "Even back then, she made something to remember. That's what humans do," Marcus said, and his voice cracked on the words. "We remember. Even when we were barely human at all, we remembered. We loved. We held on to the things that mattered." He looked up at Kira, and she saw something raw and vulnerable in his expression. "That's who we are. Not the wars. Not the mistakes. At our core, we're a species that refuses to let go of love." Kira's hand found his shoulder without conscious thought. He reached up, and his fingers closed around hers, warm and solid and achingly real. The cubs watched, their luminescent skin glowing softly in the fading light. "We should give her a name," Tessi said suddenly. "She's been alone for so long. She should have a name now." Marcus smiled through his tears. "What would you call her?" The cubs conferred in whispers, their pointed ears twitching as they debated. Finally, Tessi stepped forward, her small face solemn with the weight of the moment. "Rena," she said. "It means the one who held on in the old Velari tongue." Kira felt her heart swell until it pressed against her ribs. "Rena," she repeated. "That's perfect." They stood together in the gathering dusk, two species united by the remains of a woman who had died before either of their civilizations had risen. And in that moment, Kira understood something that no cultural exchange report could ever capture. Humanity's greatest legacy wasn't their technology or their art or even their stubborn survival. It was their capacity to love so completely that the evidence of it could survive for millennia, waiting in the dark earth for someone to find it and recognize it for what it was. A promise, a gift, a bridge across time itself. The excavation continued for 3 more weeks, but its nature had changed. What had started as an adventure became something closer to a pilgrimage. The cubs worked with renewed purpose, understanding now that every bone they uncovered was a story, every fragment a piece of someone's life. Marcus and Kira worked side by side, their professional relationship evolving into something quieter and more profound. She learned the names of prehistoric creatures and the patience required to free them from stone. He learned Velari lullabies and the way her skin glowed brighter when she laughed. They didn't talk about what was growing between them, not directly. But when their hands brushed over shared tools, when their eyes met across the dig site, when they sat together in the evenings watching the cubs catalog their finds, words seemed unnecessary. Some things didn't need to be spoken to be understood. On the final day of the excavation, the academy supervisors arrived for an inspection. Kira had prepared a formal presentation, complete with educational metrics and learning outcomes, but she knew within minutes that it was pointless. The supervisors could see the truth for themselves. 12 cubs stood before them, transformed. They spoke with confidence about geological timelines and preservation techniques. They handled artifacts with respect and precision. They asked questions that demonstrated genuine understanding, not just memorization. And when one supervisor asked what they had learned, it was little Tessie who stepped forward. "We learned that the past is not dead," she said, her voice clear and strong. "It's sleeping. And when we dig, we wake it up. We give it new stories. We make sure it's never forgotten." She glanced back at the site where Rena's skeleton still lay, now carefully protected for proper excavation and preservation. "The humans taught us that, not with words, with bones, with love that survived longer than mountains." The supervisors approved the program for expansion. Next season, 30 cubs would participate instead of 12. Within a year, the dig site would become an official Velari human cultural heritage location, drawing visitors from across the galaxy. But Kira didn't care about any of that in the moment. She was watching Marcus, watching the way the setting sun caught the silver in his hair and the hope in his eyes. He had given her something she hadn't known she was missing, a reason to believe that understanding between species was possible. Not through politics or treaties, but through the simple act of caring about each other's stories. "You're staring," he said softly, a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "I'm appreciating," she corrected. "There's a difference, is there?" She reached out and took his hand. His fingers intertwined with hers without hesitation, as natural as breathing. "In my culture," she said, "when two people share a discovery of great significance, they become bound. Not in the way of marriage, but in the way of destiny. Their stories become intertwined." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Are you saying we're destined now?" "I'm saying that one fossil was all it took," Kira said. The cubs launched a full valley dig for earth bones, and in the process, they uncovered something even more valuable. "What's that?" She looked at him, at the kindness in his eyes and the openness of his expression, and she felt the answer resonate through every fiber of her being. "Connection," she said. "Understanding. The knowledge that no matter how different we seem, we're all just stories waiting to be told. And the best stories." She paused, thinking of Rena, of the carved figure of love that had outlasted epics. "The best stories are the ones where we hold on to each other." Marcus squeezed her hand, and she squeezed back. Behind them, the cubs began packing up the last of the equipment, their voices rising in a song that mixed Velari and English words in a melody that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. The valley stretched before them, scarred with dig sites, and yet somehow more alive than it had been before. They had disturbed the earth, and in doing so, they had awakened something ancient and precious. The knowledge that humanity's heart had always been golden, had always been tender, had always been worth remembering. As the last light faded and the first stars appeared, Kira leaned her head against Marcus's shoulder and listened to the cubs sing. Tomorrow, they would return to the academy. Life would resume its normal patterns. Reports would be filed. Lessons would be planned. But something had changed, something fundamental and irreversible. The cubs would carry this experience with them forever, and they would share it with others, and those others would share it further still. One day, across the entire Velari consortium, children would grow up knowing that humanity was more than a species, they were a story. A story of love and loss and persistence. A story written in bones and buried in earth, waiting for the right hands to uncover it. And it had all started with one small fossil and one small voice crying out with wonder. It had all started with a single discovery that reminded an entire generation what it meant to hold on. Kira smiled into the darkness, feeling Marcus's warmth beside her and the cub's song in her ears. And she made a silent promise to the woman they had named Rena, the woman who had held her child through the long, dark millennia. "We see you," she thought. "We hear your story, and we will never, ever let it go."